Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today on refusal to assess. So it's how to appeal to the Send Tribunal when the local authority has done a refusal to assess on an assessment. So my name's Brennand, and I'm here with my glamorous assistant, Angela Cavill. So I'll just hand you over to Angela.
Hello, everybody. That's the last thing anybody has ever described me as glamorous. But hello, yes, I work alongside Jan doing these webinars. So welcome, everybody.
Right, so we're going to make a start. I'm going to attempt to share my screen, and hopefully there won't be any hiccups, as we seem to have got this off to a fine art. So just give me a second. Okay. Right, I'm going to do it from the beginning. Can everybody see that?
Yes, that's absolutely clear, thanks.
Okay, so appealing to the Send Tribunal, refusal to assess appeals. So if you're thinking about submitting a request for an education healthcare assessment, you will find this webinar quite useful. It may be that you've already submitted a request and you are awaiting a decision from the local authority, or you've actually submitted a request and you've received a decision letter from the local authority saying that they're not willing to proceed with the assessment. It's always useful to find out about these refusal to assess situations prior to submitting an assessment, so you have all the information there. So who can request an assessment? Just a little bit of background. Obviously, we do have an education healthcare assessment request webinar on how to do that, and that as we've delivered that to Parent Carer Voice, it's on their website as a recording. And if you go to our YouTube channel and type in Sendiass North Yorkshire, there's also a webinar about requesting an assessment, and there's another one about the assessment process. So just a little recap. So the people that can request an assessment are parents and carers, a young person if they're aged over 16, schools, nurseries, colleges and other educational settings, and also any concerned professional. So why might a local authority refuse an assessment request? One of the main reasons is because the local authority has not got enough evidence that that child or young person has or may have SEN, and I'll come to that may have SEN on another slide. The local authority may also feel that although the child does have SEN, but that does not need to be met through an education healthcare plan, that their needs can be met within the setting through what's called the delegated SEN budget. And again, I will just refer to, there is a webinar on our YouTube on SEN funding as well, and we've delivered a training on that. So if you need to know more about SEN funding, please look at Parent Carer Voice and also our website and YouTube. So the child or young person doesn't meet the criteria for an assessment, and this is set out in the Code of Practice and the Children and Families Act, and we will touch on that a bit later on in this webinar. So those are the main reasons that the local authority may refuse an assessment request. So what happens if they do refuse that request? Within North Yorkshire, the local authority holds a planning meeting at around 4 weeks. This is not necessarily done in all local authorities, and indeed it didn't used to be done in North Yorkshire. So according to the Code of Practice, the local authority should write to parents and carers and young people within 6 weeks of receiving the initial request for the assessment. However, in North Yorkshire, they are holding these what we call planning meetings at around the 4-week point. And at this meeting, they will inform you verbally if they're going to proceed to assessment or not. And if they're not going to proceed with the assessment, they will explain the reasons why. Then after that planning meeting, and they've explained the reasons why they're not proceeding to assessment, they will then send you out this letter. So within the local authority letter, it must, and must is in capitals because this is a legal requirement, it must contain your right to appeal that decision. It will tell you the time limits for doing so, and it will also give you information about mediation and the availability of other disagreement resolution services. So your right to appeal the decision is within 60 days, and it gives you very strict time limits around mediation as well, which I'm going to come into on another slide. So what are your options? You can agree with the local authority and work with the educational setting to ensure support is in place at an SEN support level. Because it might be that at that planning meeting, they've explained, well, actually, we need to gather a bit more evidence, or we need to try this first. Let's try this and let's look at it again, and then we'll have more stronger case to go for assessment. So the local authority might suggest that to you. You can actually wait 6 months, and during that 6 months time, you can gather more evidence. And this can be done by the educational setting or yourselves if you're going to see the paediatrician, for example, or you're awaiting an autism assessment. And then you can resubmit the request to assess. And again, this can be resubmitted by parent, carers, young people, health professionals, any professionals, and the school setting. You can contact Sendiass for pre-mediation support. So what we do is every week I meet with Alison Hall from the local authority, and I speak to her on the behalf of parents who are possibly considering appealing. So you can come to us and we can facilitate that with your permission. You can go to mediation, and you will need a mediation certificate to appeal. You don't have to have a mediation meeting, so you have to contact mediation and get that certificate, but then you can just go straight to tribunal appeal. So there's a lot of decisions you need to make, and it's a good idea within that North Yorkshire planning meeting to have an open and frank discussion about your rights and which way you want to go. You can then come to us and we can talk you through it in more detail. So who appeals? So if you want to submit an appeal for a preschool child or for a compulsory school age child, and by compulsory school age child, I know it says 4 to 16, it's for a year 11 child, it's on June the 30th of that school year, whether they're 16 before that or not, that they are no longer of compulsory school age. So if you've got a young person that's one of the oldest in the year and they might have gone 16 on the 2nd of September, they're still of compulsory school age until June the 30th the following summer, okay? So before they actually leave school. So it would still be the parent or carer who submits unless it's past the June the 30th date. So for young people aged 16 to 25, the parent or carer can act as advocate, but with the young person's permission. And if that young person lacks capacity to make a decision and a social worker has assessed that through the Mental Capacity Act, then a parent or carer can be nominated to act on that young person's behalf. Does it cost anything? No, it doesn't. The SEND Tribunal service is free. However, if you choose to have legal representative via a solicitor, for example, then the solicitor will have fees that will need to be paid. You can also choose to instruct a private SEN advocate, and again, there are fees with that. But it's worth remembering that in refusal to assess appeals, these are heard on the papers only. There isn't an oral hearing. So as a parent, you are probably more than qualified to do the appeal yourself. It's a case of submitting the paperwork, which I'm going to go through with you on the next few slides. But you're not actually having to go into court on a refusal to assess appeal. They are heard on the papers only, and this has been in place for quite a few years now. They didn't used to, but they changed it. Angela, can you remember when? I'm not sure what date they did change it, but it's a few years ago now.
I think it's definitely a couple of years ago now. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can look to see if you're entitled to legal aid, and there's a link there. But like I said, with refusal to assess, it is just, and what we mean by paper hearing is you don't go, there's no actual court date. What they do is they give you sort of a 7-day window, and they say, we're going to look at the paperwork from your case between this date and this date, and we'll write to you and let you know what our outcome is. So it is slightly different, and there's a different form for refusal to assess, which we'll look at as well. So when can you appeal? Your timelines for appealing. So you have 2 months from the date on the local authority's decision letter. So remember, you have that meeting at around 4 weeks. Within 6 weeks of them receiving the request for assessment, the local authority sends you a letter, and it's the date on that letter. It's not the date you receive it. So be aware of that. It's the date on the letter. So you've 2 months, or put it in other words, you've got 60 days, or you've got 1 month from the date of the mediation certificate, whichever is the longer. And I'm going to kind of explain that a little bit more when we get to the mediation slide. If you miss the deadline for your appeal, it will not be registered by the tribunal unless there are exceptional circumstances. So it's important that you look at the date on your letter and you keep that letter safe, because you need to submit that letter with your appeal as well. If for whatever reason you lose the letter, you can ask the local authority for another. They will supply you with another one. So before you can submit an appeal for a refusal to assess, you need a mediation certificate. And you get that mediation certificate for having a conversation. In North Yorkshire, it's Police Mediation that provides the mediation service. And you need to have a conversation with them, because by law, you have to have it explained to you what mediation is, what the purpose of mediation is, and then you have the option to accept a mediation meeting, or you can decline it. That is your choice, but you must have that conversation and you must get that letter, that certificate. So you can extend your deadline if you need to. So I'm going to try and give you a scenario to sort of explain that, because as I said on the last slide, you've got 2 months to appeal. But it might be that it would be a good idea to buy yourself some extra time. It might be that your child is going for up before the panel for an autism assessment, for example, and that's in, like, you know, more than the 60 days, maybe it's 65 days, and you want to wait for that outcome and use that as extra evidence. So I'm going to just give you a scenario with some dates. So for example, the local authority sends you a letter dated the 28th of February, and on that letter it's refusing to assess. That then gives you until the 28th of April to appeal or contact mediation to start that appeal process. And it may be that you've got an assessment that's due to take place, which could give you that more evidence, and you might want to wait therefore before contacting mediation. So in theory, remember, you've got 60 days from the 28th of February, which takes you to the 28th of April. You could actually leave it as late as the 27th of April to contact Police Mediation and say to them, I would like a mediation certificate, as I would like you to set up a mediation, and I wish to go, you know, I want to look at appealing this decision. So you contact Police Mediation on the 27th of April. They've then got 30 days to arrange a mediation. So, for example, they may arrange that mediation meeting on the 25th of May. That is within the 30-day time limit from the date that you called them. But by doing that, you then go to the mediation on the 25th of May. You would have possibly got your extra evidence to submit, which might overturn the decision. And if you haven't still got your extra evidence, it still then gives you till the 25th of June to submit your appeal, because you've got 30 days after the date of your mediation certificate, and that's issued on the day of your mediation meeting. So you've technically bought yourself another 2 months, because you had to submit by the 28th of April, because that's 60 days after the 28th of Feb. But you've requested your mediation on the 27th of April. They've arranged a mediation on the 25th of May within their 30-day limit, and that now gives you till June the 25th to submit your appeal. And this delay is actually often used with refusal to assess appeals, because there is often not enough evidence and information, and it's coming in. So sometimes people tend to submit a request for assessment before they've got that information. So it is sometimes something that you can use to extend your appeal time to get the information in, which might then overturn the decision. Angela, have I explained that clearly?
No, I think that's a very good explanation, because many parents do come to us and initially think they've only got 15 days to appeal. And so actually that's explained it really well, that you can extend your time, and it does give you that extra time to gain more evidence. And especially, like you say, if a child is waiting for a diagnosis meeting, that can be really helpful to extend that time. So yes, I think you have explained it well.
Good. I was reading, thinking, am I confusing everybody with all my dates?
If it's clear to me, it should.
Good. Right. Well, yeah, I do. Yeah. So it is a little advantage that you can use, and you don't just need to use it for refusal to assess appeals. You can use it in any appeal, and I do know quite a lot of parents who have used, you know, with another example would be if particularly in the COVID situation where we're waiting for schools to open to offer a place, and I know parents have used that over this lockdown and have used that extension facility so that the school that they really want has got the opportunity to do the assessment and can offer a place before they need to go down the appeals process. So it is something you can use. If you need more explanation about that, or you're in that situation and you just want us to run over the dates with you, please, you know, get in touch with us and we can look at your dates and give you those deadlines if you do want to do that. Right, so you're going to submit an appeal. Now, with refusal to assess appeals, this is the only time you use the Send 35A form. You do not use Send 35A for any other appeals. And it's a little awkward because the other form you use for all other appeals is Send 35. I think it would have been really good if they'd actually used a different number. But anyway, that's not my decision. So when you go onto the Send Tribunal website and look in forms, there's a Send 35, which is what you use for all other appeals, and a Send 35A, which is what you use for refusal to assess appeals. I'm going to have a look at the form, but I want to go through the evidence first, and then I'll open the form and show you all rather than do it the other way around. But it's really important when you send in your form, in order for the form to be accepted, it must have a copy of the decision letter from the LA, which gives you your right of appeal. So that's that letter we've been talking about throughout. It must have a copy of the mediation certificate. So those, it will not be accepted if you don't submit either of those. And obviously you need a copy of the Education Healthcare Assessment Request form and any reports and evidence you plan to rely on. Now you can send those in at a later date, but if you do not send your decision letter and your mediation certificate, it will not get lodged. Your appeal will not get lodged. So those are really important. And also if you don't sign the form, it will come back to you. It will not get lodged. So a refusal to assess appeal. I'm going to talk quite a bit about the legal test and the evidence, because this is the crux of the case. So the legal test is from the Children and Families Act, and I'm actually going to look at section 20 number 1 first. This is the legal test for whether a child or not has special educational needs. And it says a child or young person has special educational needs if he or she has a learning difficulty or a disability which calls for special education provision to be made for him or her. And if you look I'm working backwards, but if you look at section 36(8), which is also from the Children and Families Act, and look at A, the child or young person has or may have special educational needs. The child or young person has or may have. You do not need to prove that your child has special needs. You only need to show that they may have. So it's a really low bar. And if your child or young person has or may have special educational needs, then the local authority must secure an EHC needs assessment for them. So that's taken directly from the Act. And when you're looking at your evidence, you need to keep coming back to these two legal tests, because they are the crux of your case. So for example, if you have a letter from the local authority that says, we recognise that your child has SEN, however, we feel their needs can be met through provision already in school, then in law, your child has already met the legal test that the child or young person has or may have special educational needs. And therefore, it may be necessary for special educational needs provision to be made for the child or young person in accordance with a plan. Now, not every child's needs need a plan. Some can be met within the school's provision. But at the end of the day, the legal test is that they may or may not have special educational needs, and therefore they are entitled to the assessment. It goes on to section 21 again, that they have special education needs if he or she has a learning difficulty or a disability which calls for special educational provision to be made for him or her. So the legal test for an assessment is extremely low. And it may be at the end of the assessment, they can show that your child doesn't need that need met via a plan. But we're talking here about the assessment, refusing to assess. So there's a really strong case for most parents to appeal for the actual assessment. Okay. And it's really important when you're doing one of these appeals not to get distracted by irrelevant considerations. This legal test is crucial to your argument. So it's not required that they definitely have a special educational need, only that they may do. So it is possible that they've got SEN. So a child has SEN if they have either a learning difficulty or a disability. And it's a really low bar.
I think you're right, Jan, and also it's important that parents don't get distracted by criteria that a local authority might set. So many local authorities across the country set their own criteria, and they'll say that they will only assess a child when certain personnel have been involved or after a particular period of time. But I think you're right in emphasising that we go back to the legal test, because that's what the tribunal will look at. So I think that's really clear. Thank you. Yeah,
absolutely. I've worked in different authorities, and obviously with this role we meet with Sendiass specialists from across the country, and there are what I term blanket policies in some authorities. I was in a meeting for a different authority last week where the school said, oh no, we and I don't mind sharing, it was for my granddaughter, and they were saying, oh no, we can't put in a request for an EHC assessment because we have to have got a year's worth of evidence, and we have to do this and we have to do that. And I said, no, you don't. The legal test is, and you are already saying that my granddaughter meets that legal test, therefore the local authority have to assess. It all comes down to this legal test, that your child or young person has or may have special needs, and it may be necessary for special educational provision to be made. So this is what you need to home in on. So if you've already got that evidence from school, that school is sometimes, in fact, this particular school said, oh, we're always getting them knocked back because we haven't done this. And I said, but if you're showing that they've got SEN and you're putting in special educational provision to meet need, then they meet the legal test. Yeah. And it is such a low bar. So don't, as Angela says, don't get hung up on other evidence. You don't need a diagnosis. That's another big thing that we hear, isn't it, Angela? Come to the line, oh, I've been told I can't have a plan because my child doesn't have a diagnosis of autism. We know he's got it, but we're with a 2-year wait yet. Don't need a diagnosis for any condition. So again, I'll move it on to the next slide. You also need to explain your reasons for appeal, why your child fits within the legal test. So we've talked about the legal tests, and why does your child fit in those legal tests? So what are the special educational needs of your child or young person? What is the learning difficulty they have or the disability, which means that special educational provision is needed to be made? So for a young person over 18, over 16, they will need to do that. But like we said, you can act as their advocate. So it's also a good idea to say why in your evidence you feel it's necessary for that special educational provision to be set out in a plan. And you can argue that a full assessment is the only way to find out what the child's difficulties are and what help is needed. So it might be that you haven't got a diagnosis, that you've got a child who is really struggling in school. They're not keeping up with their peers. They're not accessing the curriculum like their peers, but nobody knows why. No one actually is aware of what is the problem. And a full assessment will hopefully delve into what are the issues, what are the difficulties, and what help is needed to help that young person succeed. It can also be that the needs are understood. So it might be that you know what your child's special educational needs are. They may even have a diagnosis of a condition: dyslexia, dyspraxia, social, emotional, mental health, sensory needs, autism, lots of different issues, learning disabilities that have been diagnosed, but the school or the other provision might be saying, but we can't supply all the educational help that is needed because we need there to be a plan in place so that we can get that extra funding to put in that extra support. It could be that the school or the other provision has provided all the help that could be expected, but the child or young person is still not making progress. And that's actually really good evidence that a child does need an assessment, because if the school are putting in all this help and support and the child still isn't making progress, and what's not right? Is it that they're not putting in the right type of support and help, or is it that the child needs something much more than they're able to provide? So I'm just going to attempt, before I go into what happens next, I'm going to attempt, I think I've got to stop sharing and then reshare the form so that you can all see what the form looks like. So just give me a second, I'll stop sharing, and then I'm going to hopefully, I already have it open, but for some reason, let's see if it's right. Hang on. Is that showing, Angela?
Yes, it's showing. Thank you.
Lovely. So, as I said, you go into the send, literally via Google, just go into Send Tribunal. And as you scroll down the page, you'll see a section that's highlighted. It just says Forms. Click on that and it will open you up a list of the forms, and you need to look for the Send 35A. So this is the application for appeal form. I'm not going to go into massive detail, but I just wanted to show it you. So who is the appeal about? If it's a child under 16, you tick that box, and you can just move your cursor in and tick. It's an online form. And if it's a young person age under 16, obviously you tick that. The child or young person's surname and the child or young person's first name, and please give the actual birth name. So we get, I'm trying to think of an example of, you know, I had a child whose name was completely, his nickname was the name that the parents called him all the time, but he was actually called something completely different. We just couldn't find him on the system. So it's really important that you put your child's birth name and also any middle names that they have and their date of birth, because this is an official document. It will be sent to the local authority. Well, not the actual document, but the name of the child, etc. And if you've put you know, the name your child's known by rather than the name of the child that they're registered as, then it just makes things very complicated. So it's really important that you use your child's birth name. So it's actually under section 2, the reasons for appeal, the legal test is actually there. Okay, so the tribunal will decide 2 questions in the appeal. And this is where Angela and I were talking about not getting sidetracked into information that's not relevant. You really have to home in on these questions. Describe any special educational needs that the child or young person has, because you're trying to prove whether or not the child or young person has or may have SEN. Now, in this section, you're not putting down, if they don't have a diagnosis, don't leave it blank because they haven't got a special educational need. It might be your child struggles to concentrate. It could be, I'm trying to think of some other ones off the top of my head. Go on, Angela.
It could be that they struggle within social groups in schools. It could be that their behaviour some days is off the scale and other days it isn't. It can be such a range of reasons, can't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And things like they might be struggling to retain information, so you can tell them something one day and the next day it's gone. It could be as simple as, you know, my child is 7 and cannot count to 10, or my child only says 5 words. It can be, and you can just do it in bullet points as well. Yes. Which is actually a good way of doing it. Just list all the things that make your child have a need that perhaps you know their peer group doesn't have. And then describe any special educational needs which you consider the child or young person may have which have not been fully identified. So, for example, you might say, you know, you might have put up in this one, my child is writing all their numbers the wrong way around, or my child says that the letters dance on the page. My child is really struggling with reading. And you might be thinking, I think my child might have dyslexia, as an example. Or like Angela said, your child is really struggling in social groups. Your child might not like noise. You might find noisy classrooms really difficult. I'm just trying to think of some classic autism traits that we can think of. Might have a very limited diet, might be very rigid in thought, might not cope with change. And you may put down, you know, my child is on the waiting list for an autism assessment. Or it might be that your child has social, emotional, mental health issues that, you know, they're kicking off in school. They're really struggling with behavioural issues. So you put down anything that you think your child may have as a need that hasn't yet been fully identified. And the next part is, why do you think your child or young person may require an education healthcare plan? And this is going to vary from person to person, obviously. It may be that your child is getting further behind their peer group and you're concerned that the gap is going to get wider without that extra support. It might be actually that the school support your application and the school have said, we cannot meet need unless we have an education healthcare plan in place. We are struggling. There's all kinds of reasons why it's necessary for a plan to be made. It's because the needs will not be met without the plan in place, that it's necessary for that plan to be there. And really, those are the 3 boxes you complete for this form. It is not a great epic detail. These are the reasons for your appeal. And then you put down which local authority you're appealing against. So obviously, if it's North Yorkshire, you would name North Yorkshire. And here you must put the date of the decision letter from the local authority. That's that letter I said you must keep. And if it's a late appeal or you have no mediation certificate, you tick these boxes and you explain why this has happened. It could be rejected. So it is really important to try and stick, as we said right at the start, within those dates. And then deciding your appeal. Now, it does say you can tick it for a paper hearing, you can have an oral hearing. I've never heard of one since they brought this in for refusal to assess that they've agreed an oral hearing, because they can normally be held on the papers because the evidence is there. Have you heard of one, Angela, being done?
I haven't heard. I do believe I heard of one that was submitted to the tribunal, but they didn't agree. The judge deemed it wasn't necessary for a face-to-face hearing, and so that was a papers hearing as well. So no.
Yeah, it is very rare. It is normally just done on the papers. And this is if there's a current appeal in relation to the child or a sibling that is already in with the tribunal. If you have a current appeal, and it might be a disability discrimination appeal, that's the usual one that can be that's going on at the same time, then you put that in this box. And I think what they're trying to do, say for example, you have twins or you know, well, brother and sister, and they've both been submitted for an EHCP at the same time, and both have had a refusal to assess, and you've already submitted an appeal for one, then you'd put the appeal number for the other child there. The reason for that is I think they would try, if they've gone in close together, to try and hear them on the same day. Okay. And they do ask then if you'd like them heard at the same time. You can say no, and you can request that they are. Okay. Then who is making the appeal? So as we talked about, parent or other, if the child is under 16 years, if it's a young person, or if it's an alternative parent making appeal in the best interest of a young person. Now, if you are a parent of a 17-year-old, you can't just tick this box and put an appeal in for them. They have to have been assessed by social care to not have mental capacity to bring the appeal themselves. You can't just submit it for them and think, well, they'll never do it, they don't know how to do it. It has to be the young person, unless they've been deemed not able to submit for themselves. And if you do have a young person and they do need to do an appeal, we can help them do that as well. They can come to us and we can support them. So details of the first person making the appeal, and there is a place for details of the second person making the appeal. We often get asked by parents who are separated, divorced, do we both have to go on there? You don't both have to go on there, but if the absent parent has PR, then they do have a right to be named on the form, and if they're happy not to be, that's fine, but you know, that does need to be checked. But often parents will just, and it's quite often mum that just says, oh, I'll do it. And you know, even when parents are together, they don't put both names on. And who else is involved in the appeal? This is where, if you have children that are in foster care, for example, or there is another organisation that shares parental responsibility. If this doesn't apply, just put NA in the box. Now, we often find that our names are incorrectly put into this section. So if you are a young person making the appeal, do you have an advocate to support you to express your views? Now, it may be that the young person has nominated their parent as advocate, so it would be the young person further up, and then they nominate their parent here to help them and support them to express their views. So that's what goes in this box. It might be, for example, that you're using an advocacy service, and they would go in here, or you've employed a SEND advocate. But this is for a young person making the appeal. So I'll go on to where the send advocate would come in a second. But if you're a young person making the appeal, this is their section if they've nominated an advocate, whether it be a parent, a carer, or somebody official. Okay. This section here is if you have appointed a representative. Now, Sendiass coordinators are not representatives. What this refers to, and if it's a representative, then the representative is going to speak on your behalf. So when we tend to go to tribunal, we're there as a supporter, a helper. We're not there to represent. We do, on exceptional circumstances, represent parents and carers, and that's usually when parents and carers have their own learning need. But the majority of the time we don't. If you're using a representative, that means a solicitor, a barrister, or a private send advocate. But please beware, if you fill this in for them, then they are speaking for you on your behalf. If you want to speak yourself, they're not representing you. So you need to fill in their information. Now, we often get asked, there's nowhere to put Sendiass on the form. That's because you will get, with the paperwork that comes back from the appeal, you will get an attendance form to complete, and you name us on there, and it does actually say, have you got somebody helping or supporting you? And that's where you put your Sendiass. So this is if you are paying someone to represent you, or it might be you have a friend, for example, who's a solicitor or legally qualified, and they're going to represent you. Okay. And then it will ask if you want your representative, or in the young person's case, if they want the advocate to receive the paperwork. If you're not using a representative and you're not having an advocate, then you just simply leave this blank and the papers will automatically come to yourself as parent or carer. So, and then it asks if you have any special needs. And this is more for when there is an oral hearing. So we may have a parent who has a hearing impairment or visual impairment or learning disability. I had a parent who filled in there that she suffered from really severe anxiety and would need breaks during the hearing. And it could be that, you've got a language requirement, or you might need a signer or interpreter. So this is the section to fill in if any of those things apply. And then you've got a checklist to complete. And again, this checklist is really crucial. So you must have the signed letter, and you need to tick the box to say you're sending that. You must include a copy of the signed mediation certificate. And you must have filled in the reasons for making the appeal, which was those 2 questions. I'm just scrolling back. Here, whether the child has SEN, and question 2, whether they need a plan. You must have completed that section. Those are your reasons for appeal. And you've signed and dated it. So those 4 things are crucial. It doesn't say all the forms that you might need, all the reports. Those are the things that it must have to register the appeal. So if you're coming close to your date and you've not got all your evidence together, don't worry about that. Just get these 4 things in, because the evidence you will get once you've sent your appeal in and it's been allocated a date, you get timeline and you get dates that you've got to submit all your evidence by. And it's really important that you sign it. So if you're the first parent or you're the young person doing the appeal, you sign this box here. This is for the second parent's signature, if the second parent is on the form. And if it's a representative, then a qualified lawyer can sign on your behalf, but only a qualified legal person. So a solicitor or a barrister can sign on your behalf. If you're using an SEN advocate, they can't sign on your behalf, and they need to say who they are representing at the hearing. So if you're using an SEN advocate, they can't sign on your behalf. And then the address, you can send it via email, which is the best way, because you will instantly, it takes about 2 minutes, you will get the receipt back, say that they've received it, and it tells you to put in the subject heading of the email, new appeal. And that's to ensure it's dealt with quickly, because they only have 10 days to lodge the appeal. So it helps them, bearing in mind the tribunal service gets around 500 emails per day. And that is every day. That's not just Monday to Friday. That is 7 days a week. So Saturdays and Sundays are no different. So it's really important that you put new appeal in your subject heading so that it gets seen, because what they do is the new appeals, because they've got a 10-day window, they get prioritised. So that's really important, hence it's in bold. So you can email it, or you can send it through the post. If you are going to send everything back through the post, and many parents do because they've not got electronic copies of the ECAR form and the reports, please send copies only. Keep your original reports. Do not send them in the post, because if they get lost, they get lost. And then you've got to chase up health and CAMS and whoever, OT and whoever else you've got those reports from to get copies. And that can be very, very time consuming, and they can charge you. So always copy them and send the copies if you're doing, if you're sending it via the post, and always send it via registered post. I think it's only £1.25, I think, extra, and you will then get a receipt, and you also get you also know that they've received it. Obviously, if you're sending it via email, then that's fine. But again, always keep copies of the form that you've sent by email. And keep everything safe. I think that's everything, isn't it, Angela, on the form? Oh,
there's the one last list at the end of the document.
Yeah, what you also need to do is any documents that you're sending to be considered, you need to list them. So for example, if you're sending the ECAR, you'll put the date that the ECAR was written, how many pages it is, who signed it, and what it is. So obviously it's the assessment request. So you might have the report from the health for the autism assessment. So you put the date on the document, how many pages it is, who signed it, and what it is, and it's to you know, proof of diagnosis of autism. You're only putting a couple of words in. So yeah, you do need to complete that as well.
And listing the mediation certificate and the letter from the local authority there as well. Many parents have said they find it's a really useful checklist, again, just to check that they've got everything with it that needs to be there, so that all those essential documents that need to go, they list those as well.
Yeah, you will find as well, if you're doing it via email, I'm going to stop sharing and go back into the slides. If you're doing it via email, you might have to put everything into a zip file, because it can be oh, I haven't done the share, sorry. It can be too big to send, so you just need to save it into a zip file as well. Okay, going back to the okay. Is that all right, Angela? Is it come back on the screen?
Yeah, perfectly.
Right, so we've gone through the form. So once you've sent the form in with your mediation certificate letter and any evidence, then it will be registered within 10 working days. Now you'll see in brackets I've put allow 20 there, and that's because at one point, because of COVID, they were very short staffed, and I'm going back to, you know, the first lockdown when they had several staff off sick. They are tending now to get them done within that 10-day. I've not had any late ones recently. So and I was in a tribunal meeting last week, and they were saying that they're pretty much 90% are being registered within 10 working days. So once it's registered, the case is allocated an appeal reference number, and any further information, any further correspondence you send to the tribunal, you must use that reference number in the subject heading along with your child's surname. That makes it easier for them to cross-reference. That number is unique to your child. The LA is then given a copy of what you have sent. So they get a copy of all the information you've sent in. They are then given 30 working days to respond. And they respond to the tribunal. So if they look at the paperwork and decide, well, actually, this child does have SEN and therefore the legal test has been met, then in law, we have to proceed with an assessment. And it's currently well over 90% of cases within those 30 days are conceded by the local authority, which means the local authority looks at the paperwork and decides to assess. And that's pretty much across the country, isn't it, Angela?
It is, it is, yes.
Yeah, so it's well worth, if you really strongly feel your child does need that assessment, it's well worth completing the forms and sending it in, because the chances are within that 30 working days, the local authority will concede. I'm not saying they always do, and we have had some recently where the local authority has felt that they were correct and they have gone to tribunal. And sometimes the tribunal agrees with the local authority, sometimes it agrees with the parent. It just depends on the evidence. You will then be given dates to submit any further evidence, and they will ask you who's attending the hearing, whether your witnesses, solicitor, etc. When you get your letter, once your appeal's registered, we often get parents ringing up going, I don't understand this. This doesn't make any sense. And it's the way it's done. And actually, I always say to parents, just turn to the back page, which is, you know, always against the rules, isn't it? You always start at the front, you never look at the back. But with a tribunal letter, if you look at the back, the very back page, there's a chart, a little table, and all the information that's in the front is just condensed down into a little table with about 5 lines that says, this is the date the local authority has to respond. This is the date by which the local authority has to submit its evidence. This is the date that the parent carer or young person has to submit their evidence. This is the date we want the attendance form, and this is the date of the hearing. It's all written out in a lengthy letter that's about 4 sheets of A4, but if you just look at the back and read that first, that kind of puts it all into perspective, and then go back and read the information.
Yeah, and some parents are finding that so helpful that what they do, they take a photograph of that table on that last page, so that they've always got it to refer to really quickly on their phone. So if anybody says, oh, you know, what deadline is this, or when are you expecting the hearing, they can just go straight to their phone and it's there without having to scuffle about trying to find a letter sometimes or whatever else. So it is a really useful little document at the back of the letter.
Yeah, I think they should put that first, you know, I should raise that at the next user group.
Yeah, because I think so.
It would stop the panic from so many parents being faced with so much information, when actually the crux of the information is just that little table at the back. But I think that's a really good tip, Angela. Just you know, take a picture of that table and keep it on your phone. And it's always a good idea to actually, I mean, I do have a diary at work, but I never use my phone for dates, but that's just me. I'm old-fashioned. I love my paper diary. So but if you are a person that, you know, uses their phone for their calendar in the phone, then you can pop those dates into your phone as well, and it'll give you you know, you can set it so it gives you an alert the week before, so you think, oh yeah, I must get that any extra information in as well. So that's a good way to use it as well. The 10 working days before the hearing, so that's 2 weeks basically, working days, you'll get a copy of the bundle, and that is the copy of all the information from the local authority, and it's all the information that you've sent, and that is sent to yourselves and it's sent to the local authority. And then the hearing is considered by a panel. So there's always a tribunal judge on the panel, and then up to 2 specialist members. And those specialist members might be educational psychologists, they might be SEN specialists in the particular area of your child's needs. So the last one I did was a young person with autism. So there was an autism specialist on the panel, and there was an educational psychologist on the panel, as well as the tribunal judge. And then the decision is communicated to you and the local authority within 10 working days of the hearing, and it's normally communicated in writing, giving the reasons they have reached the decision that they have reached. And obviously it will either be that they agree with you and they will then direct the local authority to carry out an assessment, or it would be that they agree that the local authority are correct in not proceeding to assessment. So just to sum up, this is your tribunal timescale, because the hearing is usually 12 weeks from the date that it is lodged. So realistically, if you look at around 14 weeks to the date that you submit, get a hearing. So at week 0, it is registered and case directions are sent out to the parent young person. That's what Angela and I were just talking about with the table in. They're known as case directions. By week 6, the local authority have to respond, and the local authority send their attendance form in. And if there is an education healthcare plan, then they also send that to the tribunal and also to the parent and young person. By week 7, the parent and young person attendance form is due to be sent to the LA and the tribunal. And at week 8, all final evidence is to be provided by both parties. Now, don't panic too much with that. I've known evidence be submitted at the hearing itself as late evidence, but it has to be agreed by both parties. And it's certainly common for it to be submitted in the last couple of weeks or even days, isn't it, Angela?
That's right, yes.
It's not unusual, for example, for reports to come in late. And it's not, and I'm going back to the autism example. If you are waiting for a panel decision and that doesn't come in till week 11, you then have to submit it as a late request, and it's unlikely that that would be refused. It's very, very rare to see relevant evidence refused, even if it is submitted late. And I say relevant because if it's not relevant, then the judge will say no. But most of the time, if it is relevant evidence and there is a legitimate reason why it is late, so please don't panic if you know you've got something coming in after that week 8 deadline. There's what's called a changes form you submit and submit for late evidence. So the week before the hearing, the LA sends out the bundle to the parent, young person and the tribunal. And that is currently still sent in paper form. Still sent out in paper form because the law states that not everybody has access to a printer, not everybody has access to a tablet or a laptop, so it is sent out in paper form for parents, carers and young people. And then week 12 is the hearing itself. So if you want more information about this, because obviously the SEN Tribunal is a complex legal procedure, there is a little snapshot on our YouTube channel which talks about appealing to the SEN Tribunal. We also have on our website how to complete the forms. There's one for SEN 35 and one for SEN 35A, and they are videos. They're done by Suffolk Sendiass, but they were done for all of us to use and embed on our website. And it talks you through each section of the form, so you can actually break it down and just watch the sections at a time rather than the whole thing at once. So it might be there's just one little section that it's usually section 2, the reasons for appeal. You can just home in and just watch the little YouTube clip on how to fill in that form. We've got lots of information on our website and lots of links as well to other sites such as EHC and ACE Education and Contact, which also have information on appealing to tribunal. We've got the leaflet as well, appealing to the Send Tribunal. And there's information on the government website, First Tier Tribunal as well. So there's lots of information out there that you can get, and you can of course come to us via our advice line, or our you can contact us via our website with a contact form on there. You can also message us on social media, and you can email the advice line as well. So there's lots of ways that you can get any further information and support on this webinar. So we're going to do some more appealing to the tribunal workshops after Easter, so keep your eye on those. We're delivering some of those through Parent Carer Voice. So if you keep your eye on the Parent Carer Voice website, they'll be in their events section, and also they're on their Facebook page as well. And we've got the snapshot on our YouTube on appealing to the tribunal as well. And we did a webinar for Parent Carer Voice on that. So there's lots of information out there. And obviously you can get in touch with us if you have any further information. And I think we've got a couple of questions.
I was going to say, please don't stop sharing the presentation. We've got one. I'm going to deal with the second question first, and it says, what was the slide after refuse to assess continued?
Hang on, I can go back. Let's have a look.
Thank you very much, and then we'll look at the next question.
Okay, give me a second if it's going to let me go back. Is it this one? Refusal to assess evidence continued.
It just says, what was the slide after refuse to assess continued?
What happens next?
There we go.
Yeah.
And you've gone through that.
Yeah, I've gone through those. Yeah.
Yes. So you've gone through those ones, haven't you? I hope that's okay. And there's a question. It says, what if you are still waiting for the evidence to come through and can't list it?
Right, again, so if you're waiting for the evidence to come through and can't list it, if I go back to this one, you have till week 8 of your final evidence to be provided by both parties. So you could put a note in that the section where you list it. If you know what evidence is coming, you can always list it. So like it might be an autism assessment decision, it might be an OT assessment. You can just list it and say, you know, to be sent, because often when people are submitting an appeal, they haven't got those reports already available, but they don't want to miss their deadline, which is why you've got another, once your tribunal appeal has been registered, so say it got registered on the 1st of April, you're going to have till the 1st of June, week 8, to submit any final evidence. And like I said, you can submit late evidence if that's needed.
Thank you. And that's all the questions, I think.
Is there not 2 more coming, or are they just
they're just responses? They're just responses. They're saying thank you. So yes,
perfect. That's great. And well, thank you very much. I'll just stop sharing then.
Do you just want to go to the last slide and oh, sorry, just to ask parents, just to ask people who've attended if they've enjoyed this, if they would like to go to our website, sendiassnorthyorkshire.co.uk, and fill in the feedback form. We welcome all the feedback that we get because it helps us to develop the service, develop these sessions.
Yes, it is absolutely really important for us. Actually, that says SEN snapshot, and I've just realised that instead of webinar. I do apologise.
Don't worry.
I think that's because we were going to do this as a snapshot to start with, and then we decided it was far too complicated to record as a snapshot. Yes, as Angela said, on our website, if you just go on, I think it's the top right, it asks for feedback. If you could please click on that and just put in that you've been on a webinar and what you thought of it, because we got funding to do these, and it's nice to evidence for Parent Carer Voice and for our own service that you've enjoyed the webinar. And if you've got any ideas, any suggestions of further webinars, we do have a list that we're going to be doing after Easter. But if there's anything specific you would like to see, if you pop that in on the feedback form, there's a little section at the bottom with any comments. You can pop that in there and we can feed that back to Parent Carer Voice as well. So that would be really helpful.
Yeah, and somebody's just asked if we're running the exclusions training on the 18th of March, and I've just responded to say yes, we are running it. I think that's the one in the evening, isn't it?
Yes, is that the Thursday evening one we're doing?
Yeah, that's the Thursday evening one. So yes, if you could join us, and if it would be useful to you, we'd welcome anybody who can come along.
Yeah, we decided to do a couple of try a twilight one for parents and carers, because we appreciate everybody's really busy. And also on Thursday this week, we're running another one on annual reviews. So that's at 11 o'clock on Thursday. And then next Wednesday at 11 o'clock, it's Angela and I again, and we're running one on special educational provision. Yeah. So that's special educational provision through SEN support, but also through Section F of an education healthcare plan. So that's going to be useful for parents who've got children on plans with a plan, and also for parents who don't. So it should be a really interesting webinar, should that. Right, I think there's no more questions.
No.
Thank you everybody for attending. We really hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll hopefully see you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.